everybody, this is the Win-Win Podcast. This is Petra Lohmeyer from Nevelle, and we are changing the format a little bit because it's not entirely sustainable anymore if I explain dozens of companies every time. So I basically want to limit it to 1 to 3 companies in every podcast. So far we have gone through quite a lot of them just to show you what is out there, because a lot of people don't even know how many win-win situations there are between humans and nature that actually make a profit already now. And that is why I showed you quite a bit in the beginning, but now maybe it is time to go a little bit deeper. So today what we wanted to concentrate on is CO2 removal through all kinds of different solutions, in this case through kelp. So this is from sea to soil, seaweed biochar for carbon dioxide removal. So basically what this company does, this is DNV, and apparently they are not just into this, but they have been operating in more than 100 countries. You can see all of this here, what their purpose and values are. So this is not just a kelp sequestering CO2 sequestering company, but a company that has been in existence for over almost 2 centuries, so since 1864. So this is really interesting. We're going to get into this a little bit further, but first I wanted to speak about something because I had an interesting experience the other day, kind of the third kind. Now, I worked in investment banks for a long time, so sometimes you do have interesting experiences there, and sometimes some rather strange ones, and I think everybody who has worked in very, very big companies has seen things like that, especially if somebody gets worried inside. So I can remember that one time it was just getting a little bit too much, and there was a little bit too much politics, and so I went to Wales and went past the sheep just by myself in my car. And I stopped at this beach, and there was absolutely nobody around. I mean, there were no houses, nothing around, right? So it's a deserted beach. There's no restaurant or anything there, and I go there, and I go into the water, and I come out. There's this man standing there, and he says, "Wow, you look really good. Can I have some photographs of you?" And I thought, this is weird. And he saw the look on my face, and he said, "Well, I'm a fashion photographer. You know, I want to make some photographs of you, and just in this wonderful setting." Now, I used to work as an actress, right? So I know fashion photographers. At the time, I had about 40 pounds overweight, and I was wearing a mismatched bikini. Like, the bottom was a different one from the top. No fashion photographer would go anywhere near me. I mean, they wouldn't go anywhere near you if you're not anorexic, but they are certainly not going to go anywhere near you if you wear something like this. So I told the guy, I mean, you are no fashion photographer. I know fashion photographers. And he said, "Okay, no, I'm working for a bank." I thought, okay, fine. So it was probably a coincidence. Next vacation, I take a vacation 3 days before I decide I want to go to Mallorca, so or it was somewhere around there. So I went there, and I go into the hotel. The first guy talks to me, and then he suddenly says, "Oh, well, by the way, I work for a bank in London." Okay, I thought, okay, that's fine. So I am starting with this whole company here with Nevelle, and I was still in London at the time, and I advertised for an event, and of course nobody came because I had no idea how to fill a room except one person who walked in and who was rather surprised to be the only one there. And guess what she was? She was a banker, a retired banker. So, you know, at some point I thought the entire world just exists of banks. And then I thought, okay, fine, guys, I know that you're watching me. So, but that was then. I'm assuming that they're not doing that anymore. But, you know, so I do know some strange coincidences. And the thing is, if you're in an English-speaking country outside your country where you grew up, and you're working in an industry like that, you kind of expect that, or you know that these kinds of things happen and your colleagues know them and nobody is surprised about this. But then if you have moved back to where you grew up, where nothing of that kind of thing ever happened, and suddenly something like this happens here, you kind of, at the time, back then initially I was really, really scared when things like that happened, but then after a while you realized, okay, nothing's really happening. They may warn you off with it, but nothing is really happening. But around here it's just so weird. So this guy contacted me over a different channel, and there were a few things weird. And initially I thought, okay, this is strange, but maybe a friend of mine just wants to give me a gift and doesn't want me to know that it comes from him. And so I went along with it, and it was very helpful initially for the first 2 sessions or so. It was a very good matching and mirroring exercise, and obviously somebody had briefed him and he knew exactly what to say and everything. And then suddenly it really turned weird. I mean, totally weird. And of course it turned out to be a climate change denier who wanted to tell me that I should be stopping this podcast because I was basically, he thought, spreading lies about what he was thinking, and he gave all kinds of titles that he possessed and knowledge and his scientific colleagues in the Max Planck Institute and stuff. And I wanted to go into the whole thing a little bit deeper then, but I thought it's really not worth giving this too much attention. But I did research it eventually to just take a look at what I could say the next time. And I wanted to just show it to you in case this happens to you and you come across this. Somebody who's a climate change denier will probably not watch this podcast, except maybe to tear it down. But if you are coming across this is what I said, why I'm not just believing the guy with what he says. I've got some pretty good reasons for that. And then I did a little bit of a search. It took me 3 questions on ChatGPT. And, I may be paranoid at times, but I'm not so paranoid to think that everything on ChatGPT is wrong. And I didn't bias the question either. So this is what I got. I will let it flick through here really, really quickly. So if you need the answers, you can take a look. Also why what he said was wrong and in how far it was deceptive. But that is all I want to say about this. So let's get into this really interesting topic. So let me just flick forward all of this. Just to give this a little bit of context, removing CO2 from the atmosphere is important because it is a central role in climate change and Earth's energy balance. I think most of us know this, but maybe you don't know the science, so I'm going to go into this a little bit. So CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It's carbon dioxide that absorbs and re-emits infrared radiation from the Earth's surface. So it is not sequestered by the atmosphere, it is just stored in the atmosphere. Sequestering happens in the Earth, for example, or in plants. We will see this a little bit later. And without greenhouse gases, we could not live here. Earth would be about 33 degrees colder. But human activities has put so much CO2 into the atmosphere that it upsets the natural balance. The human contribution, burning fossil fuels, deforestation and cement production have increased CO2 concentrations from about 280 parts per million pre-industrial to over 420 parts per million in 2025. That traps more heat and leads to global warming. That is why removing CO2 matters. Even if we stop all new emissions tomorrow, the CO2 already in the atmosphere would keep warming Earth for hundreds to thousands of years because CO2 is very stable. And natural processes absorb CO2 too slow to keep up with human emissions. So I think most of us have heard stuff like this already. Consequences of too much CO2, high global temperatures, melting ice and sea level rise, ocean acidification, which dissolves, harms corals, shellfish and marine life, forms carbonic acid, And there are feedback loops, of course, all the storms and all that, permafrost and soil, methane from permafrost and soil is amplifying climate change. So the role of climate removal, reduction of emissions is essential, but not enough. We must also remove excess CO2. And I think I mentioned before that Rolls-Royce already had a startup in that area. They sold it because it's not their core business. They actually have a very, very, very different core business. But even they, although they really have a very different core business if you take a look at their website, even they saw the opportunity in it, because with things like this you can also make money, of course. You can stabilize global temperatures, restore ecosystems and reduce acidification as well, offset unavoidable emissions from sectors like aviation or heavy industry. But you can also print things with the carbon you get out of the air. There are startups doing that already as well. There are other methods that include nature-based reforestation, soil carbon sequestration and wetland restoration, technological solutions like direct air capture, enhanced weathering, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, and ocean-based algae farming and alkaline enhancement. So removing CO2 is crucial. It's a main driver for long-lasting warming. Cutting down emissions is, of course, a problem. Now, because these weird things keep happening, that people keep denying climate change and politicians are doing weird things, that have absolutely nothing to do with what we have to do at the moment, but concentrate on stuff that should have been left in the 20th century. I actually did ask after this weird encounter, do they send these people because it's too late? I mean, is the whole trying to get carbon out of the atmosphere a duck and cover exercise? Duck and cover was this video that the American governments played in the 1950s, I think, to assure that their own people would not panic because of the crisis with nuclear weapons almost going off everywhere and basically incinerating the planet. So they made up this video. You can take a look at it on YouTube. It is so very funny, where they tell people to cover their heads with a blanket and then they're going to be okay if there's an atomic bomb that hits. And I just wondered, is this a duck and cover exercise again? And they think that we can't be saved anymore. Is it too late? But I got a very clear answer that it's not too late, but we cannot avoid disruption altogether. It's not too late to avoid the worst outcomes. Even if we cut emissions sharply, there will be more warming, more floods and more fires, but how much depends on the seriousness of our actions in the next 10 to 20 years. So it's not too late. I think that was a really good message out of this. So massive disruption is not inevitable. The scale of the disruption is a political choice. I also asked why anybody would dispute this, and I got a lot of answers, and I also put them into the little slideshow before. And if you want to actually take a look at this, you can just take a look at this and then slow it down and just take screen captures if you want. But I don't want to get into this much more done, because I'm much more interested in what can be done. So that is also what I asked ChatGPT. So there are strong reasons for optimism, because we know exactly what's causing the problem. Climate change is not mysterious anymore. It's overwhelmingly driven by fossil fuel emissions. That means the fix is also clear. You reduce the emissions, expand clean energy, protect ecosystems, and remove excess CO2. So the solutions are there, and technology is already being developed for it. In contrast to past global risks like pandemics or wars, we have a precise diagnosis, and we have control over what we do. That's a huge advantage. Well, at least the leaders have control over what we do. I hope that they're actually doing it too. Technology is advancing faster than expected. Solar and wind are now the cheapest form of new power in most of the world, which is really good, because when I talked to my boyfriend the first time about this, he told me how naive I was, because solar was going to work soonest in 100 years. He had just read this in the Spiegel. And of course that was right. I thought he was wrong. But, in this area, men always think they're right. It's not quite like that in England or in America. That is why I emigrated initially, believe it or not, because it is extreme. It's like in hypnotism here. And at some point you also think that you're always wrong, which is probably why that guy was so surprised that I didn't just take his word for it. But of course, in England and America, it's a little bit different, especially if you work in New York or London, right? So technology is advancing faster than expected. Battery costs have fallen for over 90% in the past decade. There's green hydrogen now, and people are working on a hydrogen infrastructure, which a lot of people, including Rolls-Royce, by the way, are waiting on, and the curve of clean technology adoption is exponential, not linear. So linear like this, like it used to be, the development of technology or development of human environments in general, the development was like this, right? And people could kind of see where it was going. But now it is exponential. If you take a look at the development of chips for computers, for example, and the speed of computers, it wasn't linear, it was exponential, and that is, I think it's Moore's law, right? If Peter Diamandis talks about this quite a bit. So this is, maybe I'm getting this wrong, maybe it's another law, but this is why it is possible that things could go better than we think, much faster than we think. Momentum is real, and that is true, and that is also why I immediately knew that he wasn't right, because I have worked for banks and I went to insurances, conferences and stuff, and they are all pricing it into their models. So of course they wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't necessary. So climate change and everything, right? So, and they have to by law. I mean, the EU Green Deal that we have, the US Inflation Reduction Act, Chinese huge renewables rollout, India's solar expansion, they are not small. Over 140 countries have pledged net zero by mid-century. Adaptation and resilience are getting serious funding, even in conservative regions, apparently even in Texas. So the economics favor transitions. Fossil fuels are volatile, dangerous, and expensive over time. And that is actually something that someone from an energy company confirmed to me, who said that they are shutting off the coal plants in 2028, I think, although they are fairly new, because they're just too expensive. Wind and solar is just cheaper, which I've been saying for 7 years, and initially nobody believed me. But I mean, it's logical, isn't it? It wasn't actually my idea. I went to the hedge fund that is operated by Vice President Al Gore in London, because I used to negotiate with them. And then a few years later I went there and interviewed general counsel basically for a book that I was planning. A slideshow basically where it showed, for starters, how much progress had been made, and also explained to me that, of course, oil platforms, they cost like $1 billion to build, or maybe two, and then you've got all these pipelines to service and all these other technical things, and then if something goes wrong, entire country and entire beaches are you have to clean up again, you have to compensate people, you have to compensate fishermen, never mind all the natural, the damage to the environment and to the reputation. And if you have a solar plant, you just put the solar plant somewhere. You can put the solar plants panels nowadays. You don't even have to have a field for it, although the cows or the sheep underneath will be quite happy. You can put them into the forest. I saw it the other day in a forest. A Korean, I don't know if it was real, but it looked pretty real. A Korean company apparently put these panels up, these solar panels, which looked like huge big flowers, like out of a movie. And they actually enhance the environment in a way and also produce electricity. And you can put them on windows. We've had a few of these examples before where they are actually not getting in the way at all. Clean energy is stable, secure, and increasingly profitable, which all know, which the Chinese know, especially because they're really good at the whole solar thing and at the whole EV thing. And markets and investors are shifting. That is where the whole greenwashing thing comes from, because investors want to see green energy, they want to see green investments they can make, and there are just not enough startups to invest in, because of course they want to invest in something that also makes money at the end of the day, right? Because that's what they're most of them are investing in, if they're investing in it for a pension fund, for example. I tried to switch my investments completely to green the other day. It was pretty darn difficult to get the oil industry out of there. I mean, and I had to talk quite a bit to my advisor. And that really surprised me. Anyway, nature's resilience, it still absorbs half of our CO2 a year, and it bounces back quite amazingly fast. But I think we should not depend on that, because there's real life there that is being hurt in the meantime. And life that a lot of us care about. There's success stories, the ozone layer recovery after the CFC bans, for example, acid rain decline after sulfur regulations, and species rebounding when protected. We've seen quite a few stories of that recently, and a human capacity for rapid mobilization when pushed societies can pivot very quickly. And the cultural shift is underway. So we do have interesting things that are coming, and there is a best case pathway. And I've copied it here. You can take a look at this if you want. What we are now focusing on with the CALE is the scale CD responsibility, the carbon dioxide, how do you pronounce that in English? Dioxide, right? Removal. From sea to soil, seaweed biochar for carbon removal. Key features of the project. The location is in Norway, off the coast of Frøya in Trondelag region, I think. I don't know how you pronounce it exactly. The scale is, the initial farm covered 20 acres. It is bigger now. We can see that a little bit later. Harvesting the first batch of seaweed was expected to be harvested in summer 2024 and has been harvested now. And carbon sequestration estimates suggest that 200 tons of fresh kelp can capture around 25 tons of CO2. And if you remember did I show you I'm not entirely sure. Let me see. Here are the figures. This is what needs to be removed. So this looks actually like a pretty good option if several countries do this, right? Potential applications beyond carbon capture. The project explores various ways to utilize the harvested seaweed, like biochar production, converted seaweed into biochar, which can be used to improve soil quality and lock away carbon for centuries. And the soil is really suffering at the moment as well, so that would be a win-win even there. And another option is ocean burial. We've got another company coming up that is doing that. Broader implications. We want, of course, nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation. There was another example that came up in the search here that I did that used chemicals and put chemicals into the ocean in order to change. But everybody who has a pond or who has had a pond before, if you use chemicals, that can backfire. You know, those chemicals can actually be toxic to the organisms in there, and then you've got a whole big other problem. So you probably want to use a solution that nature has already provided, and kelp is that. Kelp is that solution. So that could be a really good result. So the progress and the result is it has made significant strides, has pilot testing to commercial scale transition from pilot testing to commercial scale operation, and it is a 20-hectare seaweed farm off the coast. Seaweed was processed into biochar for soil enhancement. So there are several partners involved in this, and you can see them down here on the slide. Other companies and initiatives in seaweed-based carbon sequestration is carbon capture in Ireland. That's supposed to happen by the end of 2025. And then we have Ocean Vision Visions, which is a global initiative which aims to harness the power of seaweed farming to mitigate climate change and restore ocean health. It was launched in September 2020 already and focuses on cultivating seaweed again. And scientific insights say that seaweed can capture and sequester CO2 effectively. However, there are some challenges remaining. However, they've made significant progress in advancing seaweed-based carbon sequestration initiatives. So the word has expanded beyond the initial research into actionable frameworks and collaborative efforts aiming at scaling these solutions. So if you live in that area, you have a expertise in that area, that may be something that could be started somewhere else as well. I mean, there's a lot of oceanfront, and a lot of oceanfront that also wants to be cleaned up in a way. And this seaweed, it looks actually quite pretty if you're a diver, if you've ever seen it. So they've got the global research framework here with comprehensive lists of scientific questions and field trials. So you could actually contact them and ask them if you could partner with them, I suppose. There's an environmental impact assessment framework, expansion of focus areas. So they're also looking at low carbon seaweed-based products, developing products such as biochar, we already said, but also bioplastics and other long-lived materials derived from seaweed. I'm assuming that you pronounce this biochar. I've actually never heard this pronounced before. If you know how to pronounce it and I was wrong, just replace it with the right one. Marine renewable energy, harnessing energy from ocean sources to power carbon removal, and the blue economy, and how harnessing energy can function, we've seen in the last podcast, because I put an example in there, and I think in the one before that as well. So this is really interesting here. Another one is running tide technologies. So Ocean Visions is assisting in identifying and evaluating their innovations, providing third-party advice and assistance on research, development, field testing, impact analysis, and optimization. There was another company on this slide as well. I took it out because that was the one that may be harming marine life, and they are not sure yet, but that was too dangerous. Now, running tide technologies, I looked a little bit further into that, what it is. It is actually a startup aimed to sequester carbon by sinking biomass such as wood chips and seaweed into the ocean, and it is using biodegradable buoys. What really concerned me a little bit, though, is that it closed because it didn't get funding. Now, people are always saying that they don't have anything to fund that they could put their money into, but this is something that they could have put their money into. And Microsoft and Shopify actually made significant milestones in delivered 12,000 tons of CO2 removal to Microsoft and Shopify, apparently. But this is something that I've seen before, like Peter Diamandis' project with the asteroid mining, which would mean we wouldn't have to mine any things on Earth that destroy the environment when you mine them and also harm people, but you could just get them from asteroids, because all these things that we need for batteries and so on and so forth, they're all on asteroids as well, and they're in pretty big quantities, and they already started the company, and they've got SpaceX, and could use that. That's a sister company basically, and they didn't get enough funding for it. They didn't get the financing for it, which is really surprising, because it would not only help climate change, it would help the people who are involved in blood diamonds and stuff. I think not in this particular podcast, but I did a little bit of an expose on that in another presentation, which is also saved in this podcast, which you can see there. Blood diamonds, that is when children are used to go into mines which are not fortified, and those children die quite often because those mines break in And it is really harmful for their health as well. And you could just get this stuff, through robots from asteroids. And apparently it is doable. They already worked on it. So this would also be something that would be really helpful. And that's another thing that I see with the politics right now. That is why politics and a guy like that approaching me and trying to seed confusion is really unhelpful, because it then means that the help that could come from startups like this that are really working on the solutions already is going to be hampered, because people think it's not important anymore and they actually fall for this stuff. So I think it is really important that we start taking a little bit of responsibility of making sure that the real people who are helping the planet are actually getting the funding, even if politics out there wants to have their oil still and has all kinds of different interests which are exposed in that little slideshow that I showed before. But I think both should be possible, even for those who are interested in that, right? But good things are happening. Good things have been shown on this podcast before, and we are planning on exposing or showing new possibilities that we see out there in the internet every week here, as usual, on Tuesdays nights at 7 o'clock CET. So I hope I see you next time again. If you want to take a look at what we have done before, the link to the podcast is posted at the end, and you can take a look in English or in German, whatever is best for you. This is Petra Lohmer from Nevelle, and I wish you a wonderful week.